And next, we want to focus on current trends and payments. And before Kevin will discuss the role of payments for the ecosystem, Markus Ampenberger, he's a partner and associate director at the Boston Consulting Group, will share the latest trends and insights in payments. And stay tuned, he will also be on the panel later on. So Markus, it's a pleasure to have you here and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the very warm welcome, and hello to everybody who is joining virtually today to the Digital Finance Conference. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about cash, card, mobile, trends and payments. My name is Markus Ampenberger. I'm a partner and associate director at Boston Consulting Group. And in the next 10 minutes, I would really like to do two things. Number one, I want to share my perspective on the state of the industry. And number two, and more importantly, I want to set the scene for the great panel discussion on the payments ecosystem that we will have in 10 minutes and that Kevin will host as the next session. And of course, one important question then is, what is really the payments ecosystem that we are talking about? And when I think about the payments ecosystem, I think about the players that are providing payment services, the issuers, schemes, payment processors, the banks, and the merchant acquirers. But I do not only think about the incumbent players, I also think about the new arrivals that have been increasingly relevant in the past 10 years, the fintechs. And of course, I also think about the customers, the users of payments, which can be merchants, corporates, and consumers. I also think about the different use cases that we are seeing. Payments at the point of sale, payments online or mobile, payments between businesses in the supply chain, between buyers and suppliers, or payments between consumers peer-to-peer. I also think about different ways to pay: cash, card, bank transfer, mobile or digital wallets. So overall, it's really a very rich ecosystem, a very wide ecosystem with multiple use cases that I'm thinking about. Now, the key question is, how has that ecosystem developed over time? And what are the key trends shaping the ecosystem? And I think about 6 elements here. Number one, conversion from cash to non-cash. That's a global phenomenon, an ongoing phenomenon. It's driven by financial inclusion in the developing economies. It's also driven by the rise of e-commerce and the growth in e-commerce, and it's driven by shifting consumer behaviors. And COVID-19 has accelerated that development. Number two, customer expectations are increasingly developing and customers are getting more demanding. Consumers want to be payments easy, convenient, simple to use, yet secure. Merchants want to be payments an integral part of the customer journey and a key enabler for driving sales conversion. And corporates are on an automation or digitization journey themselves. And again,
Markus, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think you haven't started sharing your presentation. I mean, it's great listening to you, but maybe Thanks for our audience, because I know you've provided great material. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no, that's okay, Kevin. I thought I was already sharing it, but here we are. Is it now better?
Looks good. We see it in the preview mode, but this looks great. This looks great, Markus. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, thanks, and excusing that I was not sharing it. Yeah, so I was talking about the customer expectations, right? So for corporates, they are on a journey to digitize some of the core processes, and again, payments is a key enabler for them. Because payments can become an integral part of some of the key processes, the procure to pay value chain, and also the order to cash cycle, for example. And it's not only about the transaction itself, it's also about the data. The data from the purchase order can be reconciled with the invoice, with the transaction, and then integrated in the ERP or accounting system. The third aspect I want to mention is new payment solutions. Just thinking about the more than 50 real-time payment systems that have emerged in the past years across the globe. I'm also thinking about buy now, pay later, which has become increasingly popular way to pay online, and it's also a convenient consumer finance proposition. And lastly, of course, mobile payments. Not only in Asia Pacific, where we see many of the wallets that play an important role to get people access to financial services and payments, but also in the developed economies, for example, Apple Pay, Google Pay. Fourth aspect is data. Data has become an increasingly relevant topic for merchants because they understand with the payment and transaction data, consumer behavior. I'm just thinking about Starbucks, how they have used the in-app payments to better understand customer behavior, to offer personalized offerings to their customers and to drive additional revenue and sales. But also about banks. Banks can use the transaction data, of course, for transaction monitoring to prevent money laundering, but also to automate and improve credit decisioning or to drive cross-selling or prevent churn in their customers. Number 5 is technology. I already mentioned real-time payments. I'm also thinking about ISO 20022, which all banks globally have to implement as the new messaging standard for cross-border payments. I'm thinking about the European Payment Initiative that Martina has talked about in the previous session. And I'm also thinking about DLT technology and digital currencies, which is a topic in the private sector, but also recently and getting more and more important among central banks. The last topic I want to mention is competitive landscape. We see the boundaries between payment businesses and platforms becoming more blurry. And what do I mean by that? First of all, in merchant acquiring, we see traditional offline players going into the online space. We see the online players like Adyen, for example, offering also offline solutions. Another example, credit card schemes. Visa and MasterCard, for example, have heavily invested into open banking and API technology. They are also thinking about how they can diversify away from card business to account payments. And those are really good examples where we see how the boundaries between payment players are becoming blurry, how they think about extending the value chain. Now, if payment players want to remain competitive or improve their competitive position, I think they really have to accelerate on digital transformation, continue to master the technological change. They have to become a data-driven organization, and also they have to be open for M&A and partnership activities. The really good news is they are operating in a very strong environment because payment is really an industry where we experience strong growth and high valuations. And I want to underline that with 4 elements. Number 1, if we look at the global revenue pool, this is a $1.5 trillion revenue pool in 2019 with around 7% historic growth rates. And we also believe that growth will be robust in the next 5 years, depending on the recovery of the pandemic, of course, but we expect something between 4 and 5% per annum in terms of growth. Second aspect is payments is really an important sector in fintech investing, and we track the fintech space very closely with our fintech control tower. We do that for now 20 years. And if we look at that, we see that around 20% of the cumulated equity funding of $300 billion went into the payments cluster. We also see that 23% of the 22,000 companies that we are tracking are payments companies in the fintech space. Third aspect is M&A is vibrant, right? We have experienced over the past 10 years, driven by private equity and strategic investors, really a lot of deals. Some really strong deals in 2019 and 2020, multi-billion-dollar value. It will also be interesting how that will change the European landscape. The last aspect I want to mention, looking at the capital market valuation of these players. And what you can see on the right-hand side is a graph illustrating the S&P 500 companies The green ones are some of the largest payment companies that we are seeing, and they are all above median in terms of total shareholder return, most of them even in the first quartile. While some of the really strong European banks are in the fourth quartile if we basically look back at the last 5 years. Yeah, so payments is a really attractive area also for investors. So I hope I was able to show that we are talking about a really rich payment ecosystem with multiple use cases, a very dynamic and vibrant environment, and it's also an environment where we see strong growth and high valuations. And I think that we would take questions and integrate them directly in the panel discussion that I'm now really looking forward to. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the panel discussion.